What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to this week's video. In today's video, I want to talk to you about finishing my first quarter of CRNA school and what that's been like and what the challenging aspects are. Man, I've got so much to say about that. I started CRNA school in January of this year, 2022. Prior to that, I was a nurse practitioner for about 8 years in emergency medicine. Decided to make the switch. I'm in a doctoral program in Fresno, California, and I finished my first quarter. I can't believe it is already here. It's gone by so fast, flown by, and I've learned so much in a very short time frame, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. If you're new here, consider subscribing. I'm going to put out more videos related to being a CRNA student, hopefully eventually being a CRNA, and being a nurse practitioner. I think that's a part, I don't think that is a part of who I am, and that's what I want to put out content related to as well. So I'm going to try to kind of like alternate the two a bit. This week's video about being a CRNA and being a CRNA student. So, CRNA school, it has been a whirlwind since January, and it's just been wild, and I'm trying to think of the words to adequately describe it. I started school the first week of January. This quarter I was in anatomy lab, pharmacology, and evidence-based practice. And I kind of want to take it and break those classes apart and talk a little bit about each one and what it's like as a whole. So we'll start with anatomy. Anatomy has been a whirlwind of a class just because our quarter is like 13 weeks long, 12 or 13 weeks long. I really can't remember. I think it's 12 weeks. And we're going through the entire body in 12 weeks. And so it's been very interesting just because I haven't had anatomy in like 10 years. And so it's all very much a big refresh for me. So in the lecture portion of the anatomy class, we're learning just the anatomy of the human body. We have 3 classes of physiology coming up in the next quarters through the end of the year. So we didn't really touch on physiology. It's really all just anatomy, structure, some very basic function, but not really a whole lot by way of physiology. But the anatomy portion has been super interesting, learning really starting from the cellular level, biochemistry, and then going on to skin, and going on to tissues, and then going to the musculoskeletal system, going to the neuro system, learning the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the heart, the lungs, the GI system, just all of these things. And it's just a whole lot of information. And so I think that for that class, that was one of the most challenging parts, is just the volume of information, because each week we would have usually 2 lectures, and we had on our test weeks a lecture that week as well. And so it was like a grind to just stay up with all the material week after week after week. The PowerPoint slides were 100 plus slides, anywhere from 50 slides to 100 plus slides. And so it's just staying up with the material. That's the challenging part. For that class, it's not the fact that it was just some really hard information, that wasn't these just wild concepts that we didn't understand, but it was just the volume of information that we had to know and retain. That was the hard part. And so it was super interesting though. It was much like an undergrad anatomy class with some anesthesia focus put in there. It was very much an interesting class. It was just a lot. The really cool thing about that anatomy class is we incorporated ultrasound use into it. And so as a CRNA student, we had to buy the butterfly ultrasound handheld. And actually, I have it over here. I want to show you guys what this looks like. So I have the butterfly ultrasound here, and let's see if I can get it out without unwrapping everything. We had to buy the butterfly ultrasound, and so this is what it looks like here. It's just like a handheld ultrasound probe. And at some point I would love to do a review video of this in the future, because it's been super useful. I've actually used this, not this exact one, but I've used the butterfly in my prior practice as a nurse practitioner. And so we had to buy those prior to starting school. And in anatomy class, we would scan each other and scan ourselves based on whatever we were learning. So we did musculoskeletal, we did the knees, the hips, part of the back, and then when we did the neuro system, we did the nerve. We were learning the anatomy for nerve blocks. We would do the brachial plexus block, axillary block, supraclavicular, femoral, all those things. We would learn the landmarks for it. We did gastric ultrasound, cardiac ultrasound, lung, really anything you could ultrasound, we like put the probe on and did it. So that was really cool, the fact that our program like really incorporated that in so quickly. And that was a huge plus for me because I was already trained on point of care ultrasound, but like learning so much more than I'd ever learned about ultrasound in this program so far has been just really cool as well. And so the anatomy class has probably been the best in that regard as far as getting our hands-on like learning going. We really did it in that class. The lab class mirrored the lecture class in the fact that we just learned all the structures that we were talking about. And so we would go into lab and we had to know pretty much all of the muscles of the entire body. We didn't have to know the origin and insertion point, which was fabulous, but we did have to know like the muscles. Huge emphasis on like the laryngeal muscles, the laryngeal cartilages, and all of the structures up here. That was huge. All the vessels, circle of Willis, all of the aorta, all the branch, just like everything. And so it very much mirrored the lecture portion, but we were like learning the structures in lab, which was cool. So that class wasn't so bad. Like it was mainly just memorizing structures, which was not hard at all. It was hard in the fact that you had like 200 things to learn for an exam and a short amount of time to do it on top of everything else you were doing, but it wasn't like these odd concepts that you had to wrap your mind around. Which brings me to the pharmacology course. Now that one was a little more challenging. Everybody's had pharmacology. I've had like advanced pharm in NP school, but let me tell you, anesthesia pharm is something that's like on another planet. I would say that's probably been one of the more difficult courses just because that's like not really my background. Like I've never taken anesthesia pharmacology, and so it's just the concepts that you learn are just wildly different. And some things that we've learned were like the volume of distribution, which is not something that I had really learned before. You learn like zero and first order kinetics. You learn the gas law. There's some very close tie-ins to chemistry. And so if you're good at chemistry and you've taken chemistry recently, then all that kind of makes sense. But there are just some like wild concepts that you have to like learn, especially when it comes to the volatile anesthetics, and you're learning like the oil gas ratios and the blood gas ratios and lipid solubility and what's crossing where and what receptors it activating, and it's just it literally is down to the cellular level. And so the medications that you're learning about are just wildly different as well. So again, you're learning about the IV anesthetics, so propofol, etomidate, dexmedetomidine, thiopental. I'm trying to think of the other ones we learned. The benzos, the opiates, morphine, meperidine, fentanyl, sufentanil, alfentanil, remifentanil, all of the opioids, the benzos, lorazepam, diazepam, midazolam, which those are kind of familiar, I think, to most people, but the volatile anesthetics, sevoflurane, desflurane, isoflurane, halothane, which is not even used anymore, but you still have to learn about it, nitrous, all of these like anesthetics that you have to know about. And I would say the gas section was probably the hardest part, just because that's something that's just not something like I'm not given desflurane in the emergency department, and I'm not given sevoflurane. Like I'm not used to the gas anesthetics, and so how they're dosed is based on the MAC value, minimum alveolar concentration, which is like something that it's not something I've ever learned about. And so that was the challenging part there, is just the like, it's like you're flying to a different planet, landing on the planet and learning that language. And that's the challenging aspect of it. And so that was a hard part of pharmacology, was just the wild concepts that you had to wrap your mind around. And it wasn't like anatomy, like you can't just straight up memorize this pharmacology. Like I think in undergrad and like NP Pharm, you can memorize because you're learning like the mechanism of action, the side effects and that kind of thing. You're not really learning that here. Like you're really having to learn it by system. So what does it do to the cardiovascular system? Is it a myocardial depressant? Does it cause decreased preload? What does it do to the CNS? Does it decrease the cerebral metabolic rate of oxygen consumption, or does it decrease cerebral blood flow or increase cerebral blood flows? So you're learning all of that, and it's not necessarily something you can just straight up memorize, because there's so much of it you'll get confused. You really have to like understand and be like, okay, now I see why this medication lowers the cerebral metabolic rate of oxygen consumption. And so you really have to like tie that in and understand the physiology behind it. And that was a challenging part. It's not just like looking at, this piece of paper and being like, okay, this medication does X, Y, and Z. You really have to like understand it down to like a cellular level. And so that was a challenging part of that class. The last class I was in was the evidence-based practice class, and that really wasn't challenging or hard at all, just because I feel like I don't feel like I have taken advanced research classes in my prior master's program, and I've participated in research on like the unit, and so it's not something that came like super hard to me. It was a lot of work. We had to write papers and do like discussion boards and do like a literature review. And in that sense of it, it was time consuming, but it wasn't like straight up hard. And so I feel like that class was a bit of one I could set on the back burner and not focus on as much. And I could really focus on lab, anatomy, and pharmacology, which is where our like the bulk of the material that we learned this semester came from. However, starting next quarter, I'm taking Physiology 1, Pharmacology 1, Hi-Fi Sim 1, and Principles of Anesthesia 1. And so we don't really have a throwaway class next quarter, so the evidence-based practice class that we were able to kind of set on the back burner is obviously done now, and we're replacing that with Principles of Anesthesia, which is like an anesthesia course. So I instead of studying for 3 courses next quarter, I'm gonna be studying for 4. So I think that's where it's gonna get a little more challenging. You're gonna have to like juggle a lot of things, is the fact that you're like studying for like an extra course versus, you know, you had a little time to kind of time manage and figure out what was going on with only 3 courses. So that's going to be probably the most challenging part, is that fact that we're just like adding a little more fuel to the fire, so to speak. So that's a little bit about what my quarter has looked like, what's been the challenges. I would say also challenges outside of the classes has really been finding your rhythm for study. And so it's really impossible to work, but you really have to find a rhythm to study and have like a life outside of that. It's really important that you have like hobbies and that you can do something besides sit in bed and study all day. For me, that's like playing around on my Instagram page and making some YouTube videos and exercising. Like that's what I like to do. That's kind of how I like get away and decompress. And so that's been one of my ways to like exit out and like clear my brain, is by doing this, talking about it, I guess, and messing around on Instagram and going for like runs. And so, but you also have to figure out how you study. And for me, like that's active recall, reading through notes and like making flashcards. That's how I do it. And I knew that from my prior like graduate degree. I knew how to study in NP school. And I think that's something people struggle with, especially like new students coming in, you know, just from undergrad. If you're thinking about CRNA school and you've only been to undergrad, you only have your BSN, like you're really gonna have to figure out, how do you study? How do you make things happen? And that's something that you have to learn for yourself, because, you know, studying for your BSN is going to be much different than studying for your NP degree or studying for your CRNA degree. It's just going to be wildly different. And so you have to figure out how to study, and that takes some time. So getting that under your belt will make you super successful as well. Those are the things that I've found this first quarter to be challenging for me, and a little overview of the classes that I've taken. I am going to post more content related to what it's like going forward, but that's what it's been like the first quarter. If you have questions, comment below. Let me know what they are. If you're a CRNA student, comment below. Let me know what your challenges are and what you think the hardest aspects are. I love sharing that with people, and I love hearing what you have to say about what you think is challenging as well. So thanks for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.